Hello, folks. Thanks for taking a look at today's blog. The subject today is going to be fasteners and fastener type systems. So I'm going to go through some scenarios that you may see with some parts here. We got some slotted type systems, some holes with a pattern. So we're going to go through and create probably a typical scenario that you would see, which would be somebody going out and to a fastener type library, either purchased or a third party purchased, because we do have one through Siemens. It's an add-on. Of course, it comes with premium, but if you have the lower versions, classic and foundation, you can add this to it. It's a million part library where it goes through and different types of fasteners, structural shapes, flanges, etc. So let me go through and first off, let's create some holes for this bottom part that we have. A couple different ways. We can either create an assembly feature as a cut or a hole, or we can actually just use the pier location of the hole from the part from the top level. I can just do include some areas here. So let's just include. I'll just grab some edges here. There we go. Like that. So I have my regions. I can now cut those through, cut out. Let's just go and do that. Obviously, you see I don't have certain things in the sheet metal command. I'm looking for a single selection, so I can switch over to part level, and I can do a cutout here. And nope, don't want to do that in synchronous. I can do it in synchronous forward. I can grab my hole or the actual cutouts right now. And populate those through there. Get them all. I got them all. That looks pretty good. We can move things to synchronous to recognize them. So if I wanted to actually move those to synchronous, I could do that. Then I can actually just recognize those as actual holes. So we're back in sheet metal. It's going to go through and find that cutouts that I just did. And now I can tell at what type. Just use the general screw clearance, just like the top holes for a 1/2 inch. And that actually turns those into intelligent holes. All right, so those cutouts that were previously just dumb features are now intelligent holes. All right, so again, I could either have done that from the assembly, because we do have the ability to recognize holes from the assembly level on parts, or you can just do it from the part level, whichever is the easiest for us. So, all right, so let's go grab some 1/2 inch fasteners from our library. Start it up. So let me take a look at what's in our library. So we've got several million parts in here. If you load every standard, which I don't recommend, typically you're just going to load the ANSI and maybe a few metric templates. So let's go ahead and place a set of bolts on this hole right here. Right, so let's go find a bolt first. I know that's a 1/2 inch for a made for a 1/2 inch hole. So let me go through and find 1/2 inch UNC. Let's just start with the 1 inch and see if that'll work. And I'll go ahead and just place. All right, so our fastener system library is intelligent to know that it needs some intelligence, or excuse me, it needs some locations to create relationships with. Pardon me. So it looks for a face first off. So I'm going to say that face and that hole. All right, so every single one of these has the same type of intelligence built into it called capture fit. So now let me go grab a washer. I'll grab a lock washer, 1/2 inch, and place it. So the captured fit is on that one too with intelligence. Just tell it the face and the diameter to mount to, and lastly a nut to go on there. Place that one. So if it hasn't been created before, it will actually go and make the part the first time. But the second time you use it, it automatically just populates. Oh, don't know what I grabbed there. That is definitely not a 1/2 inch. It's 1.5 inch. Did I close it? No, I didn't close it out. Quarter, 1/2 inch. You can see. Yeah, that's more like it. And there we go. So that finishes the stack up. All right, so that's one way to actually create a stack system. And then I can actually create a pattern this around, or if it's just a couple of holes, I can just use, just copy paste these back into there once I'm done. All right, so let's look at another way to create a set of bolts and nuts and washers in a hole. We have something called Fastener system inside Solid Edge, and it's tied to our standard parts, so it has to be loaded for this to work. So what we're going to do, this kind of speeds things up. So I can say, look for all bolts on the face. So if I highlight that, it's going to go and try to put bolts in every single hole. Maybe you don't necessarily need all those on all of them. You can just go by single hole. So if you wanted to go and just put this in maybe these three, and accept that, then it's going to ask for a bottom hole depth. So I'm going to pick the bottom edge of this inside face, and it's going to go query the library. It's going to go find the standard parts that will actually fit that size, and I think one size down from that. Yep. So the first thing it's going to do is ask me for the actual type of component. I'll just go with the same size that I did on the previous one, a 1/2 inch 13, and I'll say add that fastener. And I typically want to say user defined. I believe I made that one 1. Let's make these 1 1/4 inch long, and that will work for the bolt. So for the bottom stack, I did put a lock washer, so again, we can go follow the same type. I can go grab a helical spring 1/2 inch lock washer, add that into it, and lastly, we need a plain nut. So hex nut, 1/2 inch, add fastener, and preview and assembly. All right, again, so this 1 1/4 half hasn't been created yet, so it's going to go out and do that. I may have used a different nut there. I guess I used a different hex. That looks like a smaller hex head bolt. All right, so what it does, you can preview it, and you can see if you got the right bolt extension. If you don't like it, you can always go back into there and say, you know what, let's go ahead and just make that match the previous one and set that back to 1 inch. Preview and assembly. And once you get the same look that you kind of want, there we go. And we'll just say OK. And once you say OK, it'll go populate the other ones that you went in already told to select from. All right, so that is fastener system. All right, so again, you can either go out to your library, drag your parts in, use relationships to place them from our standard parts, which is a little faster way to do it. The third way is using the fastener system. So I'm going to go ahead and show you another way that you may not know about. It's called the system library. So this would be a good scenario for a system library. So we have a series of slots. Used to do this a lot, putting U-shaped troughs together. Lots of fasteners, and these were kind of a pain to draw. Now with pattern by curve, very easy. And I'll go ahead and pattern this, show you, put the rest of the bolts in there, and show you how to create a curve along here. So what we're going to do is place, let's try the way we just did it with our fastener system. So Trouble is, a slot, these are actually created with our slot command. But our fastener system does not recognize these edges as holes, so it's not going to go find any bolts that will fit that. All right, so what do we do in this scenario? Well, again, we can see what size this is. So that looks 0.9 diameter. So we can go with this, I guess, 7/8 bolt. All right, let's go and do that. So again, we go to our library, our bolts. And again, use the type of relationship. So slots, so if I find the diameter of this bolt and pick that slot, notice if I use my quick pick, it finds the actual slot axis. So it will center that for me in that actual hole. So it, by default, will actually find this in the slot. So, what I want to do is, again, I could go through and just place relationships on it like I showed you, or I can actually create a system library. All right. I'm going to go ahead and create a little stack up for myself here. I have, again, I'm going to go out to my library and go grab some parts. So let's go ahead and go to washers first. So kind of categorize these how you would typically want to categorize folders. So I'm going to go ahead and make an assembly of this one time. So we have a washer. We'll go with a 2-inch bolt. And the trick for a system library is you want to just basically use relationships of the part. So the first part I use was washer face to this part, and the center of this to the center hole. So that's really the only one I want to use the center hole on. All right, so the bolt itself, I just want to use the washer itself. So for example, if I turn that off, axial to the axis of the washer, and its face underneath to the face of the washer. Of course, I could actually lock rotation if I wanted to, so it's completely fixed. So that's kind of what you want to do. I do need it on to do the lock washer, so I'm going to go and grab my lock washer now. All right, so again, I'm going to use this face and this hole. There we go. And lastly, I'm going to do the nut. In the same scenario, off of its face, off of its axis. Turn everything on. All right, so what you'd probably want to do is go through and notice I have different sizes here. You could just create a dummy master file and put all the different size. So I got like a 7/8, 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch, and just create a system library just from this one master file. And just keep adding if you need to create another system library. All right, so what is this going to do for me? All right, so I'm going to hide this. I really don't need to see these either. So to create a system library, start the command. Go ahead and save it first. My files in there. System library. So it's going to say click the components that you want to use in the system. So I want the washer, the lock washer, the bolt, and the nut. There we go. Accept that, and no available features to copy. System libraries will allow you to copy the hole that goes in. But typically I find I'm putting the holes in the parts before I even get to the fastener step. So typically I'm not doing it at the same time. So the hole is not really needed. So I'll go ahead and say next. So it's going to go through and actually look at these relationships. So the first thing it's going to look for is the face to mount that washer to, then the axis to mount the washer to. Then the last one is going to look through and look for the face for that lock nut, or the lock washer in its axis. So I'll say OK. All right, then we'll want to say create, and this is where we give it a name. So I'm just going to call this 7_8 UNC and save it to, I'll save it the same location. We'll just use an assembly template to create it with. And make sure I'm going in my right location. Fastener system library. And say OK. And save. All right, so that was it. It actually created the system library. So let's go back into this slot command. Now let's go grab that system library. So I'll go to that system library folder. Up one. So there is the system library. Sorry, that's not. Did I not finish? Try that again. So then 8, then C, 6, some of the templates. Missing something there. May have screwed up the path location. Fasteners, system libraries. There we go. Right, so we'll call this. Sorry, I think my link, I had a wrong path in there. And okay. I think that did it. So let's go back into there. There we go, 7/8 UNC. So I created the library that time. It was the incorrect path that I was using. So if I drag that in, all right, so it's kind of like that capture fit intelligence, except it's dealing with multiple parts now as opposed to just individual parts. So what it's asking me is a face to pick. So I'm going to say I want that face, what axis to go into. Again, I'm going to hover over that and get my slot axis. Goes to the center. So now it's asking me for, hey, what face do you want that lock washer to go on? So that would be this back face. And again, let's go ahead and just use that to finish it off. There we go. So it places it in there and creates kind of a stack up for me. Notice it didn't leave that. It didn't leave the system library as a library. It actually created them and dropped them at my top level. So now I have my correct bill of materials layout would show, instead of having a subassembly of these parts, it would actually be the correct quantity. All right, so that leads me to the next portion of system library. All right, because what I did on this part that I used is I created a family of libraries of this part. So what does that mean? Well, that means is, let's say we get, someone comes in and says we need to actually make this thicker. So maybe we need to add a gasket between them. So let me do that. So I'm going to go ahead and say let's replace, we don't want to replace that part. We want to replace it with a copy. We'll call it gasket. And save. All right, so I got a flange and a gasket. So we need another flange on the opposite side. So I'll just use my synchronous tool, not to rotate. Use it to copy and move that down here. And let's place it in that location. There we go. So we have some kind of sandwich situation. Let's just change the color of the gasket just to make it little easier to see. So let's turn our fastener system back on. All right, so we need to make this longer, and again, we just that actual washer is looking in the wrong location, so it's looking at the wrong face. So that one's easy to fix. You can just edit, delete it, and just kind of recreate that relationship on that face. That moves that out. But then you say, well, that leaves this way too short. So what do we do here? Well, what we need to do is replace that. So again, I made a family of parts. So if I say replace that part, it's going to come up with the list of, all right, which part do you want to replace it with, the 3-inch or 4-inch? Well, let's try a 3-inch. That should work. So it's going to just basically replace that with a 3-inch version of it. And going, if my gasket ever changes thickness, was that a fit? I didn't actually put the relationship back on there. You always move it too. Oh, that's why I just had it grounded. Sorry about that. Anyway, messed that up. Trying to show you that. Anyway, that is using a system library to actually replace. I was also going to show you the ability to pattern that along a curve. All right, so let's create our curve. And I'm going to do that with a sketch. All right, so this is just a fast way, instead of having to recreate that on every single one, we're just going to create a curve profile. Just get these out of the way. It's a little easier to see what I'm doing here. Again, we want to tie this to some geometry, but this is not active. Again, we have to look under tools and turn on something called piers. So this is the assembly level piers. So we have access to the parts from the assembly level. So I can find, common locations like the center of that. And go ahead and finish it off. Do that very carefully. So now let's put some relationships back on here. And the same thing for this. So I want to go ahead and make sure I start there and stay on center. Same thing for here. I want you to stay on center. And let's make sure this bottom edge stays concentric to this outside edge. So my profile turns black, means it's good to go. And so now I have a curve to pattern along. All right, so let me back on just to see what I'm grabbing here. So I can now come along a pattern along curve, grab the parts that I want to pattern, and the nut and the washer. So I grab my curve, make sure I get the first point. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10. I'm going to change the actual. I had the wrong count in there anyway. I need 10 as opposed to 8. That was my accident. I hit cancel. So let's change that quantity to 10. And then we go ahead and preview it. All right. So that's all great, but you'd have to do that, change that every single time. Just to show you that you can tie that together with the actual part pattern, we can come over here to look at our variables. All right, so I just created that assembly variable, which is the 10 hole pattern right here. We also have the pure variable of the actual flange, and there's the actual 10 count from there. So I can either drive it from the top level down or from the part level up. So if let's go ahead and just say I want to copy that link from the part, go to my variables at the top level, and go ahead and paste that link here. All right, so what does that mean? That means if we go back to the part level, or we can actually change it from the assembly using the pure variable. So I'll just go find that 10 and change that to quantity 8. Where that changes the number of slots, and of course, the number of slots now changes the number of bolts that go in those slots. All right, so that is system libraries, a little bit of family of parts, fastener system, and of course our standard part library, which again comes with premium but is an add-on to classic and foundation. So all levels of Solid Edge can use it. All right, so hopefully that shows you some things that you didn't know. And if you do have any questions, feel free to contact us at Swoosh Technologies. We'll be happy to assist you and answer any questions you have. All right, thank you, folks.